I think there's been a lot of misrepresentation. When it comes to freedom of the press, we're doing extremely very well.
You rank 120th out of 180 countries. It's not a glorious record, is it, Minister?
I think there's a lot of ignorance and a lot of mischief.
But the assumption has to be that you're covering up damaging evidence, doesn't it?
If those allegations are true, I'm sure it's been taken care of.
Despite promises to respect the rule of law, Nigeria's government stands accused by the international community of serious human rights abuses. My guest this week here in London is Lai Mohammed, the country's information minister. How does he defend against the country's many critics when the evidence of wrongdoing is so compelling? Lai Mohammed, welcome to Conflict Zone.
Thank you, sir.
The human rights record of your administration has been widely condemned by the UN, Western countries, your own lawyers, international human rights bodies, for brutality and a stunning lack of accountability. Why does this go on in Nigeria? Why don't you get a grip on this?
I think there's been a lot of misrepresentation.
By all these groups?
Absolutely.
Really? Working in concert?
Well, I wouldn't know whether they're working in concert or they're working, alone. But I know for a fact that this administration in particular has been very sensitive to the issue of human rights. Sometimes terrorists, politicians, activists are confused with human rights.
So you put it all down to confusion?
I would do that because I do not know as a fact, and I've been a minister for almost 5 years, that there's any policy of my administration that's deliberately targeted at infringing on anybody's rights.
Minister, last September, the UN Special Rapporteur on extrajudicial summary or arbitrary executions, Agnes Callamard, she launched a damning report on Nigeria, and the human rights abuses of your security forces. She spoke of countrywide patterns of abuses, include the police and military's excessive use of lethal force in violation of applicable international standards. I'm sure you read the report. She's not a person who makes these accusations lightly.
I did, but I would have been much more impressed if examples are given. Now, you must not forget that Nigeria has been locked in a war of attrition with the Boko Haram for almost a decade. And the kind of war we are fighting is a war amongst people. And even then, the military has been very careful to ensure that as much as possible, rights are not violated. Now, I've also read about reports of people who claim that their rights have been violated simply because they have been arrested by any of the security agencies and they've been asked to go through what I call due process. But I know that as a policy, this government does not violate anybody's right.
If it's not a matter of policy, why have there been so few investigations? The UN investigator spoke about the absence of effective investigations, the absence of meaningful prosecution, all of which are compounded, she said, by the lack of transparency over the vast majority of security issues. That accusation about lack of transparency and effective communication strategy goes straight to your door, Minister, doesn't it? You are the Minister of Information. Serious criticism here.
Well, I know as a fact that several cases of abuse of, rights, especially against soldiers, have not only been investigated, but people have been punished and they've been made public.
How many? How many people have been punished?
I don't know offhand, but
You're the Minister of Information.
Well, well, of course, I can't know everything, but I know that the military also is very jealous of its reputation, and they have set up many, panels, and affected officers have either been dismissed or imprisoned.
The International Criminal Court isn't impressed by your record. It says in 2018 there was a reasonable basis to believe that the Nigerian security forces committed the war crimes of murder, torture, cruel treatment, outrages upon personal dignity, and intentionally directing attacks against the civilian population. But you have failed to cooperate with their investigators and failed to provide information that they requested. And if you take these things seriously, and you cannot but take the word of the International Criminal Court seriously, you would have provided that information. Why didn't you?
I wouldn't know what information they were asking for that was not provided. But I know that we've been cooperating with every agency, especially when it comes to...
But they say they weren't. They weren't getting help from you. They weren't getting the information.
I know that the ICC met with the authorities in Nigeria, and we would have no choice then but to cooperate.
They've been waiting for years to get your cooperation, and it hasn't come, Minister. Maybe you're out of the loop here.
What?
Maybe you don't have information about what's going on in your own government.
I'm very informed about what goes on in my government, and I'll say, actually, I do take the trouble to ask. And I'm not, like I say again, I'm not aware that we have withdrawn our cooperation from the ICC.
The UN Special Rapporteur speaks of countless allegations of excessive use of force by your police, in particular officers of the Special Anti-Robbery Squad, or SARS. You said you wanted specific examples. These are specific examples. They've been accused of widespread torture, in some cases leading to deaths in custody and extrajudicial killings. So the unit is clearly out of control, isn't it? Because the UN Human Rights Committee warned your government to ensure that this group operates in accordance with international standards, because they don't trust that it's doing that at the moment. Why would that be?
Yes, I think I'm aware of that. And at a point in time when the report came out, the SARS was disbanded and only to be reconstituted, and warned that henceforth they must ensure that they operate within the confines of the law.
Your own National Human Rights Commission investigated their activities. It even held public hearings, but the results were never published. Why?
I'm not aware that the results were not published. I'm not aware.
But the assumption has to be that you're covering up damaging evidence, doesn't it, which you're afraid to make public?
I don't think we are covering up any damaging evidence. Some policemen were dismissed. The entire SARS was disbanded and reorganized thereafter.
Minister, on the question of providing information to outside investigators, you failed to provide information to the UN under the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which Nigeria has signed. Last August, the treaty body accused you of failing to honour your reporting obligations under Article 40 of the Covenant and ignoring numerous reminders to do so. Why is that, when you tell me you're cooperating so openly with these bodies? Why would they say that if it wasn't true?
I wouldn't know why they would say that, but I know that we have never shunned any international organization. We are very open. As much as possible for any country who is, waging an internal, who's fighting internal, insurgency. We're very open, and we operate within international, regulations and laws.
Well, clearly you don't, according to the bodies that monitor these situations.
Well, it depends on from which perspective they're getting the information.
Well, they're getting it from different perspectives, aren't they? We're talking about human rights organizations, international human rights organizations. We're talking about the UN. We're talking about all kinds of bodies, the International Criminal Court. They're all saying the same thing, that you're not cooperating. And you sit here in front of me, Minister, and say that that's simply not true. It's like saying it's darkness outside when we can see it's daylight.
No, I think that analogy is not correct. I know that daily we receive, we entertain, and we engage all these bodies as a government.
And you're not going to move from that version, despite the evidence that I have quoted to you.
I'm yet to see any evidence that that is.
It's all there in black and white in the official reports.
That I've not responded to. When you talked about SARS, yes, I admitted that yes, we received the report and we took action.
Minister, when you're not stonewalling on requests for information, you're taking radio stations off the air and having reporters arrested or beaten. June last year, you tried shutting down Nigeria's oldest private TV channel, as well as radio stations owned by a member of the opposition PDP, Raymond Dokpesi. A federal court overturned your suspension, but the Nigerian Guild of Editors called this a barbaric crackdown on free speech. Why are you launching a barbaric crackdown on free speech?
I think there's a lot of ignorance and a lot of mischief.
The editors don't know what they're talking about.
No, Dokpesi's station was closed down because he owed the national regulator, not because of the news he was pushing out.
And in January last year, soldiers raided the offices of one of your leading papers, the Daily Trust, and arrested reporters. In March, a journalist who'd been held for 2 years was rearrested. You rank 120th out of 180 countries in the Press Freedom Index of Reporters Without Borders. It's not a glorious record, is it, Minister?
Well, I think when it comes to freedom of the press, we're doing extremely very well. If papers run foul of the law, they must face the consequences. But when you have virtually 100 newspapers in the country, and you are citing the example of one newspaper that was closed down in a year, I think it should be fair to us that we have a very robust free press.
Amnesty International says that between January and September last year, at least 19 journalists and media practitioners were attacked. Those attacks include verbal and physical assault and indiscriminate arrest and detention by your security forces. The impression, Minister, is therefore that your aim seems to be to stifle freedom of expression, especially critical voices. You don't like criticism, do you?
That's not correct. You see, because I think many of these people don't know the ecosystem of the media in Nigeria. Virtually every major, print media is owned by individuals, and I can tell you that there are at least about 12 national newspapers. And Daily Trust, I can't quite remember what the story was. But you cannot take the example of one newspaper among about 20 to say that the country is stifling the media. On the contrary, at a point in time, I felt that it was the government that was actually at the receiving end of the media.
What has also worried people enormously is your decision to submit a bill which in its original form would have seen anyone convicted of so-called hate speech actually sentenced to death by hanging under particular circumstances. You actually wanted and you sought authorization from Parliament to kill people because of something they said. Why would you do a thing like that? Extraordinary and shocking provision for this.
I think what is even more shocking is the ignorance of people. There's what is called separation of power in major democracies. This particular bill talking about is a bill submitted not by the executive, but by the legislative arm of government. So how can you accuse the executive?
You submitted this bill?
We did not, sir. As I said, there's a lot of ignorance. We did not. This is a private member's bill by a senator, which is the
yes, and you're telling me you didn't want it to go through. Is that right?
We have a choice in which bills go through or not. The bill has been discussed, there's public hearing. You see, the government does not come in until when the bill has been passed.
And you didn't use any influence to get that done at all?
Absolutely none.
If this bill had gone through, Minister, journalists could have been jailed for any article deemed threatening, abusive or insulting, and could have been hanged if their work caused any loss of life. Well, you didn't object to this bill, did you?
You don't, you see, there's what is called doctrine of separation of power. The only thing you can do as the president is refuse your assent to such a law. The law has not been passed. The law was not originated by the executive.
The law is still going through the Senate.
So how does Mr. President stop it without being accused of, dictatorship and muzzling the...
You telling me you wouldn't have signed the law with that provision in it?
I think this...
You can't tell me that, can you?
You have been speculative.
You can't tell me that, can you?
When we get to that bridge, we have to cross it, we look at what are the contents of that law. In what form will it be passed? But you see, people rush, too hastily to judgment. You said we submitted that bill. We did not. We know nothing about it.
You didn't want it submitted?
We don't micromanage the parliament.
Really? What about the Protection from Internet Falsehood and Manipulations Bill, also carrying draconian provisions? Under its terms, journalists could be imprisoned for publishing content.
Who is the author of that bill?
Are you against this bill or not?
I'm not even aware of that bill.
You're not? The Protection from Internet Falsehood and Manipulations Bill. You're not even aware of it?
I'm not even aware of it. So it cannot
it's causing an outcry internationally, and you're the Minister of Information and you know nothing about it.
There's no such bill before the House.
There is a bill.
I can say that very authoritatively. There is no such bill before the House.
Reporters Without Borders said these bills, talking about the Prohibition of Hate Speech Bill and the Protection from Internet Falsehood and Manipulations Bill, they said these bills contain extremely harsh penalties that violate international law and are likely to be used to gag the media, and you're saying you know nothing about this one.
No, just the same way they were wrong in saying that the executive submitted the hate speech bill.
Minister, let's talk about corruption, because in your country it seems to begin with the government, doesn't it? The International Centre for Investigative Reporting said last year that among 9 countries in sub-Saharan Africa, Nigeria has the worst managed sovereign wealth fund based on accountability, transparency and oversight. Why is your record so bad on this?
Absolutely false.
Really?
Absolutely false.
A report by the National Resource Institute's Africa office, based on data from 2017, said you had failed to regularly disclose publicly the financial interests of government officials in the extractive sector or the identities of beneficial owners of extractive companies, despite making public commitments to do so.
It's absolutely false. It's the first thing you do. The first obligation as a minister or a public official is for you to make a public declaration of all your assets. And any minister or public official who does not do so risks being prosecuted, and we know many who are not being prosecuted as a result of that. 2, is to the credit of this administration that only a few months ago we passed, we put in place a policy that compels every ministry, every department to make public any expenditure above £10,000 so that the public can challenge what is being spent for. It's also the credit of administration that no government has ever succeeded in securing the conviction of high-profile politicians like this administration, and especially those of them who belong to the ruling party. We continue to fight corruption because...
And you follow the rules, do you?
Absolutely.
So in 2018, why, towards the close of President Buhari's first term, why did the Auditor General himself raise serious concern about this so-called excess crude account that you have? This is an oil savings account which holds dollar reserves from crude oil that are sold above the assumed benchmark price. And in July that year, the Auditor General warned you to bring your handling of this account into line with the law. Why, if you tell me you follow the rules, did he feel the need to say that?
You see, precisely because he said it, that shows how transparent the administration is. The Auditor General is an appointee of
It shows how shocking he thinks your behavior actually is.
No, on the contrary.
Really?
It shows the level of transparency in the administration that an appointee of government can say this and yet retain his job.
He noted there had been deductions from the account which appeared to have been made illegally. In other words, deductions that apparently violated constitutional provisions. Why would that be? And why would he say that if you're following the rules, as you tell me you are?
You see, everywhere in the world, even the most democracies, you have auditor generals.
You have what? Sorry?
Auditor generals.
Yes, yes.
And their duty is to monitor the excesses of government. Now, the fact that he's allowed to do that job and he still remains in office, I think it's a testimony to the fact that we're running a very transparent, administration. The effect, if the
Mr.
effect,
do you want congratulations for that?
I won't get it from you.
As opposed to criticism from the Auditor General, who says you're not in line with the law.
Without
you don't think that matters?
Without prejudice to the correctness or not of that allegation, the fact that he can make that allegation, submit it, is being looked into, and it still remains Auditor General. I think that will not happen in an administration that does not believe in transparency.
He said the audit team could find no legal authority for even the existence of this excess crude account. So it's a sham and a slush fund, isn't it? Why don't you admit it?
Admit that.
Yeah, there's no legal basis for this account.
I don't think it's correct to say that there's no legal basis for it, because the crude oil crude excess account, I have known about it even before we came to government.
It said the audit team could find no legal authority for even the existence of this excess crude account. How come you'd ignored persistent warnings from the Auditor General, as he said, year after year, not just your government, but the previous one, going back to 2007, to bring this in line with the law? Again, you tell me you follow the rules, but it's not backed up by the Auditor General.
Well, we follow the rules, and even that allegation even that assertion is correct. The whole idea of an Auditor General is to point out to you what you are doing wrong and for you to do it right. I don't see any government in the world that they say, oh, we always follow the law, we always do everything correctly. But I say again, the fact that Auditor General can make that report and nothing has happened to him, is still in office.
Yes. And what? You continue to make illegal deductions from the account?
Well, it depends on what you mean by illegal deduction.
Deductions that violated constitutional provisions.
It's not. You see, if a government violates constitutional provision, it is the responsibility of the Parliament to take appropriate action. But I don't believe that we do.
It's the responsibility of the government, if it cares about the people's money, to mend its ways, isn't it?
Oh, of course, but that's if you admit that you have even violated the laws. But what I'm saying is that, yes, the Auditor General could have found some anomalies. The whole essence of Auditor General anywhere in the world is that there should be checks and balances. And all he has just pointed out here is that there are some irregularities, and then the appropriate arm of government will do the needful.
So what are you going to do in future about this?
I'm sure it has been.
What are you going to do?
If those allegations are true, I'm sure it's been taken care of.
Well, it hasn't been, and he's been reporting and complaining about the government's attitude to this account since 2007. Well, just as the UN has been complaining that you haven't been giving information about torture and excesses of violence used by your security forces, as the International Criminal Court has been complaining. All these complaints are piling up, Minister. What are you going to do in the future about them? Stonewall?
We look at every complaint, we look at how authentic they are, and we take action. Like I've told you, there have been several court martials. Many military officers have been jailed, some have been dismissed, and it's in our interest.
Global Witness says despite a 50-year oil boom which transformed Nigeria's economy into the largest in Africa, 80% of your people live on less than $2 a day. They say that an estimated $400 billion has gone missing from state coffers. Are you going to tell the people of Nigeria where that money has gone?
Well, under our watch, between 2015 and 2019, nobody can substantiate any such allegation. And I can only speak for when I became a minister. And I can say categorically that between 2015 and today, nobody can talk about all money missing.
Lai Mohammed, thanks very much for being on Conflict Zone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.